Tractate Avodah Zarah, page 35. The top of the page with the words Biklal, the Surah Hana, Sharu, Pirshaidu. One can learn by inference from here that with regard to animals from which deriving benefit is prohibited, their excrement, which is the content of their stomach, is permitted. Although deriving benefit from both a burnt offering and an unslaughtered animal carcass is prohibited, the excrement of each is permitted. Similarly, although deriving benefit from an ox that is to be stoned is prohibited, its excrement is permitted. So I guess for fertilizer, maybe. Okay? And from the fact that Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Ishmael, cheese of Gentiles is prohibited because they curdle it with the stomach contents of calves used for idolatry, used for idol worship. That Rabbi Ishmael responded to him, if that is so, why didn't the sages prohibit deriving benefit from the cheese? One may learn by inference that with regard to animals of idol worship, their excrement is prohibited, since the cheese formed with the stomach contents of an animal of idol worship is prohibited. It is evident that the excrement formed in the stomach of such an animal is also prohibited. The Mishnah related that rather than addressing Rabbi Ishmael's final difficulty, Rabbi Yehoshua diverted his attention to another matter. The Gemara inquires, but let him respond to Rabbi Ishmael's query by explaining that the sages did not prohibit deriving benefit from cheese, curdled in the stomach contents of an animal used for idolatry, because there is no substantive prohibited entity in such cheese. The Gemara reinforces its question. After all, isn't the halakha with regard to fish stew, according to the opinion of the rabbis, an application of this rationale, as they did not permit deriving benefit from fish stew prepared by a Gentile? What is the reason for this leniency? Is it not because there is no substantive prohibited entity in it? Although fish stew may contain the wine of a Gentile, deriving benefit from it is not prohibited because the wine is not discernible. Why didn't Rabbi Yehoshua explain that deriving benefit from cheese of a Gentile is similarly permitted because it contains no substantive prohibited entity? The Gemara rejects this possibility. The sages say in response that here, with regard to cheese, since the rennet curdles it is considered like an item that contains a substantive prohibited entity, although the prohibited rennet is not discernible in the cheese. It is nevertheless considered a substantive prohibited entity because it is essential to the formation of the cheese. וכולי מי, כי טובים דודיך ביין, כי אספתי מממה, כנס ישראל מן הקדוש ברוך הוא. רבוינו שלא אילם, הרי במלאי דברי דודיך יותר מאנוש בתורה. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yehoshua diverted Rabbi Ishmael's attention to another matter and began discussing the verse, for your love is better than wine. Oh, they're talking about wine, so I guess. Your love is better than wine. Song of Songs, 1 verse 2. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the verse, for your love? Dodecha is better than wine? When Rav Dibi came from Eretz Israel to Babylonia, he said, the congregation of Israel said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Master of the universe, the statements of your beloved ones, Dodecha, meaning the sages, are more pleasant to me than the wine of the written Torah itself. Okay. Ma'ishna haika dishalai Rav Shimon ben Pazi V'itema Rav Shimon bar Ami Mireshe dekra kamarle Yeshekeni minishikot piu Amarle Yishmael achicha shok zotecha zobazo Yadem ha'elashif. The Gemara asks, what is different about this verse that led Rabbi Yehoshua to ask Rabbi Ishmael a question specifically with regard to it? Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said, and some say Rabbi Shimon bar Ami said, he chose that verse because he sought to tell him a message that can be derived from the beginning of the verse, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Song of Songs, 1 verse 2. In essence, Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, Yishmael, my brother, press your lips one to the other, and do not be so hasty to retort. Meaning, do not persist in your questioning. My time. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that Rabbi Yehoshua instructed Rabbi Ishmael not to question him further? Amar Ula b'yitem Rav Shmuel bar Abba Kesei Chadash ahi V'en mepak binan ba Mepak pekin ba Mai gazer da Amar Rav Shimon ben Pazi Amar Rav Shimon Levi Mishum Niku. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that Yehoshua basically shut him down, Rabbi Ishmael down, didn't allow him to ask any more questions? Ula says, and some say that Rabbi Shmuel bar Abba says, the ordinance prohibiting the cheese of Gentiles was a new decree, and therefore one does not scrutinize its origins. The Gemara asks, what was in fact the reason for the sage's decree prohibiting the cheese of Gentiles? Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi says that Rabbi Yehoshua Levi says it was due to the concern for puncturing, meaning the concern that a snake might have deposited its venom in the cheese, as Gentiles are not assumed to be careful about this. V'leim v'leim mishum nikul k'de'ula di'amu l'gigaz v'le'atma v'le'atma atres ya'nishadum Dilma, Ika, Inish, Dilo, Stirah, Beati, Lezal, The Gemara comments, but if so, let Rabbi Yehoshua simply say to Ishmael, it is prohibited due to the concern for puncturing. Why did he choose to avoid answering? The Gemara explains, Rabbi Yehoshua reasoned in accordance with a statement of Ula. As Ula said, when the sages decreed a decree in the West, Eretz Israel, they would not reveal the reason behind it until 12 months of the year had passed. Let there be a person who does not agree with it and will come to treat it with contempt. Migadif ba Rav Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah yiveshtiri yashintishtiri. Amar Rabbi Chanina yavesh mutarem v'nichal yavesh yashan mutarem v'yashem. Rabbi Yirmiyah would ridicule Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's explanation that the prohibition was due to the concern for puncturing. If that is so, dry cheese should be permitted. Likewise, aged cheese should be permitted, as Rabbi Chanina says, with regard to exposure, a dry substance is permitted even if it was originally in the form of an uncovered liquid, because a snake's venom does not let it dry, meaning congeal, and an aged liquid is permitted, as a snake's venom does not let it age, as it causes it to spoil instead. Amar Yochanan lefi she'i efshar la belot tzchtzuchei chalav u'shmona ba'al mipnei shamir noda be'o kevat nevela Gemara presents two alternative reasons for this decree of the sages. Rabbi Chanina says the cheese is prohibited because it is not possible for it to have been made without containing particles of non-kosher milk. And Shmuel says the cheese is prohibited because it is curdled with the skin of the stomach of an unslaughtered animal carcass. Okay, Vagufa, Shalia, the Gemara comments, Shmuel's statement indicates that only the skin of the animal's stomach is prohibited, whereas the contents of the stomach, meaning the rennet itself, is permitted. The Gemara asks, and did Shmuel actually say this? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah in Chulin 116a, with regard to the stomach contents of an animal slaughtered by a Gentile and the stomach contents of an unslaughtered animal carcass, each of these is prohibited. And we discussed it and asked, why does the Mishnah mention both an animal slaughtered by a Gentile and an unslaughtered animal carcass? Is that to say that an animal slaughtered by a Gentile is not classified as animal carcass? By mentioning each of these separately, the Mishnah indicates that generally they are subject to different halachot. This is difficult, as an animal slaughtered by a Gentile has the halachic status of an unslaughtered animal carcass. And in answer to this difficulty, the Mishnah is in fact teaching that a single halacha, which is that the stomach contents of an animal slaughtered by a Gentile are considered to be like the stomach contents of an unslaughtered animal carcass, and therefore prohibited. Earlier, Shmuel asserted that the only physical skin of an animal's stomach is prohibited. Shmuel said that only the physical skin of the animal's stomach is prohibited, which indicates that the stomach contents are permitted. In his explanation of the Mishnah in Chulin, Shmuel posits that the stomach contents of an unslaughtered animal are prohibited. Lo kashi, this is not difficult. And now we turn to 35b. So the Gemara is saying this is not difficult. What does it say? Kan kodu chazava kanach chazava. Here, with regard to the Mishnah in Chulin, Shmuel's comment reflects the explanation that Rabbi Yehoshua before Rabbi Yeshua's retraction of the assertion that it is prohibited to derive benefit from the stomach contents of an animal carcass. There, with regards to the Mishnah in Avodah, Shmuel's statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua after his retraction of that claim. And although this indicates that the Mishnah presents an outdated ruling that was later rescinded, the Mishnah does not move from its place. In other words, once it has been taught in a certain manner, the Tana will not change the text of the Mishnah in order to reflect a change of opinion, so as to avoid confusion. Rav Malkiah mishmei Rav Ada bar Ahava mipnei shemachlikin panea b'shuman chazir. Rav Chizda amar mipnei shemavin ota b'chometz. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar mipnei shemavin ota b'sraf ha'ola. The Gemara suggests additional reasons for the decree of the sages. Rav Malkiah says in the name of Rav Ada bar Ahava, the cheese is prohibited because the Gentiles smooth its surface with pig fat. Okay? Rav Chizda says it is because they curdle it with vinegar produced from their wine, which is prohibited to derive benefit. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says it is because they curdle it up with sap that is subject to prohibition against consuming the fruit of a tree during the first 3 years after its planting. Orla. Kiman. Parenthetically, the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is Rav Nachman's claim that the cheese of Gentiles is prohibited because it is curdled in the sap of Orla? Kiman. Okay? The Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is Rav Nachman's claim that the cheese of Gentiles is prohibited because it is curdled in the sap of Orla? The Gemara answers, it is in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in the Mishnah, or 1:7. Rabbi Eliezer says, with regard to one who curdles cheese with a sap of orla, the cheese is prohibited because the sap is considered to be fruit of the tree. Afilu tim Rabbi Yehoshua, ad kan lo palig. Plig Rabbi Yehoshua alea, Rabbi Eliezer ela mikitva, de givaza, ale kitva de perin moide. The Gemara comments, you may even say that the statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, who disagrees with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, as Rabbi Yehoshua disagrees with Rabbi Yehoshua only with regard to the sap of a branch, but with regard to the sap of a fruit, Rabbi Yehoshua concedes that it is prohibited as orla. Rabbi Nachman's statement can be understood as referring specifically to the sap of a fruit, which would mean that it is in accordance with the opinions of both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. The opinions of both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Vital. Behind it's not Yehoshua, Shemati beferush, Shivamim b'sraf ha'olim b'sraf ha'ikorim, Mutar b'sraf ha'pagim, Asur b'nei shoperi. The Gemara adds, and this is in accordance with that which we learned in the continuation of that Mishnah. Rabbi Yehoshua said, I heard explicitly that with regard to one who curdles cheese, with the sap of the leaves and the sap of the roots. Sap of the leaves? Leaves have sap. Okay. I guess they do. Sap of the roots of an orla tree, the cheese is permitted. But if it is curdled with the sap of unripe figs, it is prohibited because that sap is considered to be fruit. Bein Rav Chizda, Bein Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Tashter b'hano, Titzel b'hano Akashya. The Gemara raises a difficulty against the last two suggested reasons for the decree of the sages. According to Rav Chizda, who holds that the cheese is prohibited because it is curdled with vinegar made for the wine of Gentiles, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who maintains that it is prohibited because it is curdled with the sap of orla, one should be prohibited from deriving benefit from the cheese, as one may not derive benefit from either the wine of Gentiles or orla. The Gemara concludes, indeed, this is difficult. I wonder what makes the Gemara, smiling thing, decide to end it off with kashya, means it's difficult and there's no resolution, as opposed to teku. What is the difference between kashya and teku? Dorash Rav Nachman b'reder Rav Chizda, my dichsiv l'reach shmonech ha'toivim. Now we're going back to Shir Shirim now. L'reach shmonech ha'toivim lama tamil chacham domeh. Litzlochit shel pilayatin. No? Pilyaton. There we go. Migule, reach nodef, mechuse, and reach nodef. Rav Nachman, son of Rav Chizda, interpreted a verse homiletically. What is the meaning of that which is written? Your ointments have a goodly fragrance. Song of Songs 1:3. This is a metaphor for a Torah scholar. To what is a Torah scholar comparable? To a flask of palatin. When it is exposed, its scent diffuses. When it is covered, its scent does not diffuse. ולא עוד, אלא דבר שבחוסים ממנו מסגלים בו, שנאמר עלמות תאהבוך. קריבי אלומות, ולא עוד אלא שמלך המוות אוהבו, שנאמר עולמות תאהבוך. קריבי על מוות, אלמות is על מוות, ולא עוד אלא שנאכל שני עולמות, אחד עולם הזה ואחד עולם הבא, שנאמר עולמות קריבי עולמות. The Gemara remarks, and moreover, when a Torah scholar spreads his knowledge, matters that are generally hidden from him are revealed to him, as it is stated, maidens, alamot, love you, Song of Songs 1:3. And one may read into the verse the hidden alumot, and moreover, the angel of death loves him, as it is stated, maidens, alamot, love you. And one may read into the verse, the one appointed over death, al-mavit, loves you. And moreover, a Torah scholar inherits two worlds. One, this world, and the other one is the worlds to come, as it is stated, maidens, alamot, maidens love you. And one may read into the verse worlds, alamot, and that's the end of that. New Mishnah. Ve'elu divarim shel goyim nesurim v'nesurim Yisrael hano. Chelu shel shechalach goy ve'en Yisrael orehu v'yapas v'shemen shelahen. Rabbi ubet dino hitiro she'ashemen. This Mishnah lists items belonging to Gentiles, which it is prohibited to consume, but from which it is permitted to derive benefit. Now, these are items that belong to Gentiles and are prohibited, but their prohibition is not of an item from which deriving benefit is prohibited. Milk that was milked by a Gentile, and a Jew did not see him performing this action, and their bread and oil. The Mishnah notes that Rabbi Yehuda did not see in his court permitted the oil of Gentiles entirely. V'hashlakot uchvashim shedarkan letet letocho yain v'chometz v'taret terufam v'tzir she'en bo naga kilbid shotetet bo v'achilek v'koret shel chiltit u'melach shlakondit הרי אלו אסורים, ואין אסורים איסור הנאה. The Mishnah resumes its list, and boiled and pickled vegetables, whose usual manner of preparation involves adding wine and vinegar to them, and minced tarit, fish, and brine that does not have a kilbit, fish floating in it, and chilak, a sliver of chiltit, and salkondit, salt, see 39b. All these are prohibited, but their prohibition is not that of an item which deriving benefit is prohibited. And now we start the Gemara. The Gemara says, Chalav ma'ni chushla, hi mishum achlofet to'eh, chivar tomei yarov, hi mishum erov ne'chut tamamah, chalav to'eh, chalav tomei, ein onen. The Gemara asks concerning milk with regard to what do we need to be concerned? Why is milk prohibited? If it is due to concern that the Gentile might exchange the milk of a kosher animal with the milk of a non-kosher animal, this concern is unfounded, as kosher milk is white, whereas non-kosher milk has a green tinge to it, and therefore they're easily distinguishable. And if it is prohibited due to the concern that it might be mixed with non-kosher milk, let the Jew curdle the milk from a Gentile, and as the master said, milk from a kosher animal curdles, but milk from a non-kosher animal does not curdle. The Gemara answers, if one desires to eat it as cheese, indeed, one can simply curdle it, as the milk of a non-kosher animal does not curdle. What are we dealing with here? We are dealing with a case where one desires to use the milk of it in kamcha, also known as kutach, a food item that contains milk. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but in that case, let him take a bit of milk and curdle it to test whether or not it has been mixed with the milk of a non-kosher animal. If it curdles completely, it is kosher. If some milk is left over, it is not. The Gemara explains, since there is also whey in kosher milk, which does not curdle, there is no way, no pun intended, there's no way to establish the halakhic matter with regard to it. Even kosher milk will not curdle completely, and therefore this is not a reliable method to determine the halakhic status of the milk. V'bayasema, 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 ay ay, ay 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 ay, ay 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 ay. I feel the same about like the Gemara presents an alternative suggestion, and if you wish, say instead that you may even say that the concern applies where he needs to use the milk to make cheese, and there is milk that remains between the crevices of curdled cheese, and therefore there is a concern that drops of non-kosher milk might have mixed in with it. The Mishnah teaches, and bread belonging to Gentiles is prohibited for consumption. Rabbi Kahana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, unlike oil, bread was not permitted by a court. The Gemara asks, from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan states that bread was not permitted in court, can it be inferred that there is a different opinion that claims that the court did permit it? In Dechi Asara Dimi Amar Pama Chasiat Sarab Rabbi Desade Evi Goilefana Baspur Nime Faso Amar Rabbi Kamanae Padzo Mara Uchachamim La Osra Mara Uchachamim Mishum Chatnut. The Gemara answers yes, as when Rav Dini came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said, once Rabbi Yehuda Nasi went out to the field, and a Gentile brought before him a sa'a of bread baked in a large baker's oven, called a porne. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, how exquisite is this loaf of bread? What did the sages see that caused them to prohibit it? The Gemara asks incredulously, what did the sages see that caused them to prohibit it? It was prohibited due to the concern that Jews might befriend Gentiles while breaking bread with them, which could lead to marriage with Gentiles. The Gemara explains that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was not asking why bread was prohibited in general. Rather, he asked, what did the sages see that caused them to prohibit bread even in the field, where this concern does not apply? The Gemara knows that upon hearing of this incident, the people thought that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi permitted the bread of Gentiles, but that is not so. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not actually permit such bread. This is why Rabbi Yochanan emphasized that the bread of Gentiles was never permitted by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's court. Rabbi Yosef Yitim Shmuel Yehuda Amar Lo Kach Hayem Naaseh Ela Amru Ha'am Achat Halach Rebbe Limakom Echad V'Ra'a Pat Dachuk Letalmidim Amar Rabbi Ein Kan Palter K'Sifurin Ha'am Lo Amar Palter Goy V'Hu Lo Amar Ela Palter Yisrael. The Gemara records an alternate version of this episode. Rav Yosef, and some say Rav Shmuel or Yehuda, says the incident did not occur in this manner. Rather, he said once Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi went to a certain place and saw that bread was scarce for the students in the study hall. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, "Is there no baker here who can prepare bread?" Upon hearing this incident, the people thought to say that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was referring to a Gentile baker, which would indicate that bread baked by a professional baker is permitted, even if he is a Gentile. But in reality, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi stated his question only in reference to a Jewish baker. Amar Rabbi Chelbo. Rabbi Chelbo says, the Gemara cites two qualifications of leniency that people inferred from the above incident. Amar Rabbi Chelbo said, "Afilu l'mandom l'palter goy l'omran ela deleka palter Yisrael. Aval makom dika palter Yisrael." Rabbi Yochanan Amar, "Afilu l'man de'amar palter goy, haninami b'sad de'aval be'ir lo mishum chatenut." The Gemara cites two qualifications of leniency that people inferred from the above incident. Rabbi Chelbo said, even according to the one who thought to say that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was referring to a Gentile baker, we said the bread is permitted only where there is no Jewish baker. But in a place where there is a Jewish baker, the leniency would certainly not apply. And Rabbi Yochanan said, even according to the one who thought to say that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was referring to a Gentile baker, the statement only applies in the field. Applies only in the field, but in the city, it would not apply, and the bread would still be prohibited due to the possibility of marriage with a Gentile. Evo habi manachet nachel pat abe mitzri amaro rava v'temer nachem v'yitzchak lo tishtamu behadeh de'aivu tika'achelach mid'amai. The Gemara relates, Ivu would bite and eat bread of Gentiles at the boundaries of the fields. Rava said to the students in the study hall, and some say that it was Rabbi Nachman who said to them, "Do not speak with Ivu as he eats bread of Arameans who in deliberate violation of a rabbinic decree." The Mishnah teaches, and their oil was originally prohibited, but later permitted by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and his court. The Gemara recites a dispute with regard to the origin of the prohibition of oil. Rav says Daniel decreed that oil is prohibited, and Shmuel says, but he says will be continued tomorrow, God willing.